Sexy. So let's talk about White Death, the Battle of Velikiye Luki, right, which is right here on this river. Okay, so I set this up. I posted pictures of what my initial deployment was, and so I set it up with the Germans because they had to set up first. And I figure, well, we know the Russians are going to start on the other side of this creek, river, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so I said, well, we need to spread, not knowing really how things were going to work because I never played this type of simulation before. I spread them out to try to cover every possible way because they can cross right over that thing. All right, then, so that gives the advantage to how I set the Russians up. So I decided to set the Russians, other than some ski troops over here, to sort of focus everything in here, clear a hole in the middle, and then attempt to get around Velikiye Luki and hopefully find these bridges to get across and then cut the city off, much like I believe they were doing. So, and I heard some people talking about using all the movement points and just running right around the Germans. Well, when I set up, I don't really think I left any pockets where they could just shoot that far. But now, being as how the movement rates are like 1/2, 1/4, and depending on how many movement points you use, I guess it would be possible. Which, in a sense, would still probably reflect what the Russians tried to do anyhow, and that is go bypass the city, cut it off, and then head for the north-south railway, which is back up yonder on the other end of the map. Okay, so you have to account for supply. The Russians get 4 supply points a turn, according to the charts, and the Germans get 2. If you decide to do barrage before combat with your artillery, what you do is you burn 2 supply points, you do your barrages, then you do your assaults using those 2 supply points, okay? If you decide to just assault, then you just assault with your combat units, you burn 1 supply point, and your artillery can use its support points, I believe, okay? So what I decided to do as far as the movement goes, well, if I burned up all the Russian movement points on the first turn, all 10 of them, then the Germans would just have free reign. So I said, okay, well, let's kind of get a little balance, just a little balance. So what I decided to do was roll a 1d6 for the amount of movement points that were getting used. And the Germans actually got 6 right off the bat, but I had zones of control to cover most everything. Even though, yes, I know they can move into and out of by expending points, but it says they have to stop when they enter a zone of control. They can leave a zone of control, but I think that's in their next phase. Like I say, the rules are still new to me. So I decided, well, you know what? Let's try to shatter these front line German units that I put in here. And it's really not that easy. You don't use any factor on the defending unit when you fire against them. You use the chart, which tells you, and I'll have to turn it sideways, but you got a number up here, depending on what type of unit it is, that becomes their defense factor. All right. Then you might have supporting artillery adding to it, and the attacker may also. Now, the attacker uses his strength plus a multiplier on the back of the counter that is called they call it the combat factor on the back. So you multiply the combat factor on the back by the strength point on the front, and that's what you get your firepower. And then maybe you throw in some support for the artillery, and you can get some of these odds up there to, 45, 53, 63 to whatever the defender is. But you still got to roll on a chart, and then you usually get a morale check, or a morale check 1, morale check 2, morale check 3. And what that means is the number after the morale check is the number of steps they lose. Now, no unit can lose more than, so if you have a 2 strength unit and you combat it and you roll a morale check 4, no unit can lose more than half of its current steps. So I guess that kind of delays how long the units last in the game, but it seems to balance pretty good. So this was no just break through and run like crazy, but the second impulse of the first turn, the Germans got the 381st Infantry, and I just came straight up the road. They had 3 movement points. So they came in, they were down here. They only had 1 movement point to use last turn. So they came in, and then on this one here, they were able to expend 2 to get into position, and then you have to burn 1 to do the assault. You have to do that ahead of time. And I had moved the artillery forward so that they could provide their support. I was going to barrage, and I looked over and said, oh, I can't do that. The Russians only have 1 supply point left. So So we used them in support. And if you fire artillery at more than half their range, their support or barrage factor is halved. And it works both ways. Plus the defenders applying artillery to support to their defense. So the Russians have not broken out. They did push a hole here up into this town right in here. And then I took troops out of the city back here, moved them up to try to delay that action while some more German ski troops have arrived. And the units I have on the back line here, which is where all the objectives are, back here in this town and back down here along this railroad, I'm trying to leave them in place as long as I can, all right? And sort of start to build that defense around Velikiye Luki. So it's kind of fun. Kev pointed it out, and I got to agree with him. The counter flipping for the assault to combat units that's kind of a pain in the butt. But if you were playing 2-player, it would be great because you're not showing those actual abilities, those multipliers that are underneath the counter. So it's kind of somewhat has a little bit of a blind combat type situation. So that's pretty cool. Older game, simple map, love it. Legible counters, lots of info on the back, good deal. And we're getting ready we're still on turn 1 right now, but I've already had 2 impulses or 3 impulses apiece, and the Russians are out. The Germans still have 4 more movement points to use. They're not going to do any combat because they don't have any supply points left. So, and the Russians don't have any supply points left. The Germans still have their supply for the units in Velikiye Luki. So if something gets up there, they have supply. But that's really it. So it looks like the Germans might have to start pulling back. I need to get this artillery out here. Although they're holding on the fringes pretty well. I mean, all of this over here is German, right here. And all of this over here, all this blue and the green over here, and these are German. So I don't know. Maybe pull back a little bit. This is going to be a rough area for the Soviets to move through over here with all these lakes and ponds. Not so hard over there. So I think if I set this up again, I might position the Soviets maybe coming out of the woods over here and sweeping by. Maybe way wide over here to the right. If you're just going to go ahead and bypass Velikiye Luki, might as well just sweep over here. Because like I say, your movement points are, like, it might cost a half in a clear hex, using a railroad or a road, depending on what type of unit you are by that letter designation. Like a D is draft animals, which some of the Soviet artillery, I think some of the German artillery might be Ds too. And then L's for leg, W I think is wheeled. T is tracked, that's mostly your tanks and mechanized infantry. Okay, so horse is horse, and then draft, I wonder why there's 2 different ones. I guess they could be mules on the draft, I don't know. And then motorcycle. So I haven't seen any of those yet. I'm sure they're coming later. All right, so this is Velikiye Luki. This is White Death from 1979 GDW. And kind of cool so far. So let's get this posted so y'all can see what I've progressed in just 6 total impulses. All right, talk to y'all soon.